How's it going, ladies, gentlemen, and Amazons out there? Welcome to my spoiler review for Wonder Woman 1984. Now, I believe when this will be going up, I hope you've all had a Merry Christmas. At least I think that's when this is going up. But either way, big thank you once again to Warner Bros. For inviting me to see this in London, because I actually saw this, I believe, on the 14th, which gave me the opportunity to give you guys my early thoughts and my spoiler-free review. And I wanted to wait to upload this until now because I realized that there are many people who are going to be watching this on Christmas Day, whereas in the UK and actually many other places, we've had it since I think around the 16th. So I didn't want to put this up when there's not going to be even many people watching it. And obviously this review will be going over a bit more of what I couldn't talk about. I don't want this to seem like more of a critical review, like slating the film, but I also don't necessarily want to repeat myself from what I said in my non-spoiler review with regards to the overall like message, themes, and aspects of the movie that I thoroughly went over in an 18-minute non-spoiler review. I don't think I've ever done a non-spoiler review that dove into a lot of detail without saying anything about the film at the same time. And honestly, as much as I find Wonder Woman 1984 a very charming movie, there's still quite a few picks here and there that I can chuck at it. I'm sure you maybe heard fellow reviewers or other people out there dish similar things. It's not the most perfect film, but overall in my experience, the issues I'll raise aren't to the hardcore detriment of what it still achieves. So let's start right from the top. I believe one of the things I said was my preference, for Wonder Woman 1984 or the first installment, which is just Wonder Woman. I believe I did lean more towards the first one, and I think that I'm gonna have to stick with that. And not in a way that is a downplay remark of Wonder Woman 1984 though, because this movie still does plenty of great things in terms of all, ticking a lot of boxes for what I want to see from Gal Gadot's Diana Prince and Wonder Woman. I just felt like the first one was, of course, while it still had a lot of fun and funny moments, it felt a bit more grounded and tone-wise a lot different, actually. But that is also something that is being very vocalized by Patty Jenkins in terms of, how Wonder Woman 1984 is extremely tonally different from the first installment. But even though it's something I can still enjoy a lot, it just doesn't have that same prestige, personally for me, compared to the first movie, and it didn't feel as compelling in the same way the first one was, which was, as I said, a bit more grounded in all the ways that just appeal to me a bit more, and also a little bit less cheesy, goofy, in which this movie is painted like a broad stroke with, but that also isn't necessarily a bad thing either. I suppose there's just two different flavors that are presented with the franchise so far, and you get to have a preference depending on what you're more into, which I actually find really fascinating and great, because normally if an established series does something like that, normally it might have the adverse effect and saying, oh no, that you've completely changed everything, the character. But what Patty Jenkins achieved here with such a colorful, warm, and vibrant film, contrasting the first one, is it maintained Diana Prince and Wonder Woman to a T. No matter what, before I get into the more nitty-gritty details, this is something I'm going to reiterate again and again, even though I said this a lot in my spoiler-free review, that Gal Gadot is the definitive Wonder Woman. She personifies the character and what she stands for, just like how there are other actors out there who fans feel like they are more or less definitive versions of that character in live action. For example, a couple of them would be Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, Jared Leto for all the Jokers out there, but that's a bit more okay, I'm joking. Heath Ledger, I would say, for most people, but you get what I'm trying to articulate here, and I think that Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman is up there on the list. And even though we get a different take on Wonder Woman in 1984 compared to the more Amazonian warrior demeanor they went for in the first Wonder Woman, this new coat of paint on Diana with hope and compassion and love, which, was still present in the first movie, but in this one it's very capitalized upon, and she still delivers that with such ease. And just to kind of get a bit deeper into the whole action of Wonder Woman 1984, it doesn't exactly demand the action or a consistent, oh look, there's a bad guy, let's kind of face him and battle him, kind of in a way in how the first Wonder Woman, obviously in the third act, which was, I believe, the most criticized, she faced off against Ares, and it was a bit more of that cliched boss battle moment. But in this film, it was kind of depicted and spoken on in a much larger level. So to kind of retread my action comments from my spoiler-free review, review, I feel like it did achieve a decent enough blend of what people typically think of when it comes to a superhero movie in terms of action, but also promoting a larger issue for Diana to deal with that was arguably just as interesting to watch unfold throughout the movie. I also think that this just speaks and attests to the larger display of Wonder Woman within the movie. Recently, when seeing more and more about Wonder Woman, which obviously at the moment is a very easy thing to come across with the promotion and hype around this movie, especially for those who are still yet to see it as of when I'm recording this very video, I've seen people talk about Wonder Woman having many different takes to different people, and that there's this Wonder Woman the warrior with her sword and shield, as she's been portrayed quite a bit like that in the various DCEU movies in her very first introduction against Doomsday with Batman vs Superman. But then there's this movie in where Diana is also portrayed just as accurately, because there is more than just one side to that character. So in this movie, I can't even remember when she wielded her sword and shield, but it just offers the Wonder Woman of love, if you will, hope or peace, rather than that of the combative type. She tries to achieve her resolution by different means. And those takes in the comics are very interesting, because you can really dive down one alleyway of the character of Wonder Woman, but you can also just go down this route, and it's just interesting to see how we've kind of got two flavors with the two movies now. And of course, that's what I felt like Patty Jenkins was striving for. She articulated that enough as well, and all while Diana can be both, they definitely capitalize on the Wonder Woman of peace brokering in this movie, almost like a Jedi, always defense, never attack, whatever Yoda said there, something among those lines. And also, just speaking of the action, I really enjoyed Wonder Woman kind of losing her powers, because it just added a bit more gravity to her actions in the movie, even though at the same time, you know, she's going to be fine, and so I guess that kind of takes away from it a little bit, but it's still definitely mixed up the bag, so to speak, compared to having the full height of power goddess that we're used to. But let's get into the characters and some of the issues I had, all while I really enjoyed the additions, the new additions and the old additions that returned in this movie. So for example, Steve Trevor, I praised him a lot in my spoiler-free review, and as I stated in that spoiler-free review, he's still a very welcome addition to this movie for me, and I do think that it didn't rely on retreading that same ground they had in the first movie just to kind of like bolster it for fans in the second movie, to, you know, just rely on something that was popular in the first one. Instead of that, I do stand by that he was very integral to bringing to fruition some of the film's messages and themes that were not only very tied to the Wishstone, but for the main character's development, such as Diana. I mean, for crying out loud, Diana finally moving on with her life after decades and decades and decades of not allowing herself to, and even as the titular hero, struggling herself and wanting to let Steve go just as she got him back, despite her powers going. She put the world in front of herself and her wants for a life with Steve to try and renounce her wish and save the world. And that scene where she said goodbye felt very quick and sudden, but also just as kind of jarring, because it kind of felt like out of nowhere. The sheer defeat in Gal Gadot's acting there and in Diana's face, while also summoning the strength to like charge and face Maxwell Lord and save the world, was a very emotional moment. But I did mention in my spoiler-free review that some kind of weird issues came to mind that I just questioned why. Why did they do this with his return? I felt like it just overcomplicated something that could have been very easily substituted with just the very MacGuffin you've got in this movie. For example, I personally would have just opted for a different route of bringing Steve back, since he was brought back by a literal magical godlike stone, to the point of then you may as well just magically bring him back in his own body as well, because why not? But since the way you went with it introduced the following strange issues. And if you haven't figured that out for yourself yet, fair enough. Maybe I'm kind of unique in this. I already know there's a couple of other videos out there on YouTube where I watched their reviews and they said the exact same thing, to the point of this wasn't his body. Like, it literally wasn't him. They woke up in bed together, and I don't want to go that far, but it's not outside the realms of imagination that if Diana is in her nightie and Steve is in bed and they just reunited, that, you know, there's some poor guy whose body's been hijacked and there's absolutely no permission or anything from him. And I'm not trying to sound woke or anything like that. It's just weird. There's this guy who has no say in spending the night with Diana Prince, and I'm not saying anyone would complain about that, but it's just still a very weird ethical question that is raised with how our main character is just okay with doing that, because it's very easily arguable that they had some fun time. Even if Diana did just see him, because as we saw in the movie, like, he looked in the mirror and it was literally some other guy, even if the magic for her with the wish just had her seeing Steve, I still find it's just like, well, you could have just actually, since you brought his soul back, because he talks, there's loose references to heaven, and wherever I was, it just felt right, or whatever he said. He's been brought back. You may as well just spawned him a body, because it would have just skipped over this kind of weird issue that, if you peel back the curtains, which I think goes over the head of a lot of general audience members who just don't think that extra layer sometimes. It's like, oh yeah, that is kind of really weird. And to tie it all off, they bring that actual guy back. And I couldn't help but think, with the way that Diana was smiling at him the whole time, like, I just found it really weird. Like, he was there at the end of the movie, and it's just like, yeah, technically, me and you had a good time, but you had no idea about it. I don't know. I guess my point is over there. It just didn't have to be that way. It could have just bring Steve back, like Steve. But let's dive straight into the bad guys corner. And I guess, just to start with Kristen Wiig, I still really enjoyed Kristen Wiig's Barbara Minerva and Cheetah. And I felt as though she was a good example of the message of kind of power and greed that this film was striving for with the 1980s America that, we've already gone over quite a bit in the spoiler-free review, was at its kind of pinnacle of power, and everyone was like kind of wanting more with just everything that was, available and coming to availability at the time. And that was mainly funneled through Maxwell Lord, of course, but Barbara Minerva being a good example of a byproduct of his catalyst. However, her personal plot in the movie felt kind of fairly straightforward, like almost too straightforward. And what I'm trying to say there is, it wasn't so much of a slippery slope for her, but more than a straight slide down the hill to being bad, which is just the polar opposite for the character that was set up in the movie as this innocent, timid, shy person. And I'm not saying it's outside the realms of possibility to imagine the way it actually was unfolded in the movie, of course, but what I'm trying to articulate here is that there wasn't so much of a transition into her final version of the movie, but rather an easy slide into being bad for kind of bad's sake. However, I felt like it was a shame as well, speaking more on that we didn't actually get to see too much actual Cheetah in this movie, and I'm sure you're seeing this in several different reviews kind of all around the place. It's just, this raises a larger problem with just in general the action in the movie for me. This movie certainly didn't require itself to be action dominated whatsoever. However, if in a movie's trailer most of, if not all of the action is seen within the trailer, then I think that presents a bit of an issue, because I'm pretty sure that was the case with this movie. Like, all the major action we got on Wonder Woman 1984 was pretty much showcased in the trailer, and even then, with Kristen Wiig's Cheetah battle with Wonder Woman, it felt kind of over before it started. And I think this speaks to the larger drop of the bottle with this movie, if that makes sense, in terms of how there was quite a bit of hype surrounding Cheetah going into this movie, and rightfully so, because she was heavily showcased in the trailers, just like how I detailed how almost all of the action was. So when fans go in and you only get Cheetah in these very scenes that you're seeing on screen right now, it's almost like, okay, I see. And then by the end of the movie, it didn't really feel like there was any send-off for her. It was just like, oh, the book is closed, All I'm trying to say is it just felt like a bit weird, like not fully kind of fleshed out with maybe what they wanted to try and do, and almost like it was like Cheetah was underutilized in the movie despite how much Kristen Wiig was in it. And I think the word I'm looking for is that Barbara Minerva, and especially in a Cheetah form, felt fairly contrived for Wonder Woman 1984, despite all of the entertainment that she still provides. Also, another thing, and this is being mentioned quite a lot, they kind of totally glossed over as to how she actually became Cheetah. It's just like all of a sudden, at this point she was, badass Barbara, and next minute, she's a cat, an actual Cheetah cat, and it's like, oh. Narratively speaking, it just kind of happens. Now, Pedro Pascal, I still thoroughly enjoyed his delivery, performance, and everything as Maxwell Lord. However, I feel like the wish stone and the convenience that surrounded him to control the masses of population in the USA with their wishes through the explanation of the satellite kind of left a lot for the audience to assume, oh, this is just how it works, when really it was really obscure still, at least to me. I loved how throughout the movie, Max Lord, of when he became the very essence of the Wish Stone, fulfilled people's wishes throughout the movie, except with the new addition to the Wish Stone that was now him, is that he gets to decide the consequences of said wish, which, you know, led for very, you know, entertaining moments. But when it came to the satellite affecting everyone, I did find it a little bit strange in the way it was kind of offered. Yet again, it felt like we just kind of had to go along with it. I know there was an explanation, but throughout the movie, as of what we understood, is that he had to touch throughout the movie. And to be fair, they said something about particles literally coming down from the satellite. But yeah, it just didn't seem airtight, if you know what I mean. Because, as I said, you had to touch you beforehand for you to make that wish and for it to happen. And then it was just like, oh yes, but the satellite and you being through TV, the particles will come down and bounce off. And I guess with someone watching the TV, that radio wave or particles, I'm pretty sure they said particles, was somehow establish the same thing as the touch. I don't know, it just felt once again a bit contrived, like, for the sake of the plot. And what even happened when his son made the wish? Like, you know, what was the trade-off there? Because if not, then why does the wish fulfillment and consequences change concept throughout the movie? I mean, did he just not give a consequence to his kid? Another thing here as well, it just felt like a bit too convenient, and even though it was to promote the grander message of the film and how, oh, you know, hope, humanity, compassion for everyone, and what I'm trying to say here is just that it felt a bit too convenient for the display of promoting that in the movie. And I do feel like that message could have still been achieved in a different outcome, but it was relied upon that everyone who made a wish was to renounce it. I mean, I just felt like, are you telling me there wasn't one person out there who was like, no? I don't know, like, it just didn't feel really well explained, you know, in that moment where Diana was, you know, had the lasso around Pedro Pascal and she was speaking to all the people, and I guess there was a lot of chaos going on, and the most optimistic person would be like, yeah, damn right, everyone just renounced their wish. Now, I'm pretty sure there'll be one person be like, nah, like, I love this. I love what's going on. So, but regardless, with Pedro Pascal's Max Lord, even though it was a bit of a cliche with the son being proud of the father moment, it still really pulled it off with the emotion and I guess the sympathy you feel for the character despite him being kind of bad. Like, he was literally like, can you dispatch of her indefinitely or whatever? Like, he was basically telling his security to kill Gal Gadot. So, like, you can't really see Pedro Pascal's Max Lord to be like, oh no, he was really just trying to make his kid happy. I mean, he was, but you get what I'm trying to say. At least he wasn't completely one-dimensional. And I think if it was any other person cast and it wasn't Pedro Pascal, of course they could have the ability to be really charismatic and steal the role, but I think that Pedro carried the writing for Max and the circumstances around him a lot in the movie. I mean, of course, you have the typical things in the movie which don't merely bother me as much, like, you know, Pedro Pascal, when he was in the room, was screaming to Wonder Woman, like, when he was communicating with her, and, you know, you just had, like, Diana in the corner speaking really normally, and, you know, the scene just cuts to Max Lord just shouting at her with all of those effects going on, or when Diana used her, like, RFID kind of work card to get access to those jets, and I'm pretty sure it's easy to figure out who accessed the building, even in the 80s, like, things like that, they just expect you to be completely fine with and forget about. There was practically no, like, connection to BVS or anything like that, the DCEU, which they totally didn't have to acknowledge, and I'm pretty sure, like, it's fairly under the blanket, so to speak, understood that they don't really care too much about connecting it to the Snyder era of the DCU, even though it technically is. If Wonder Woman in Batman vs Superman, there was literally nothing else on her apart from that picture with her and Steve Trevor in the first movie, and, like, there's no other appearances, there's no other mention. Like, Batman would have been on top of that in that file, yet you have the intro of the movie and things like that with her in costume in the mall. There's literal news reports of her, and you're meant to have believed that she's been helping out, but, like, in low-key ways, but she's literally being reported about on the news. So I feel like, I don't know, it's a bit inconsistent there, but I think you're meant to kind of come out of it being like, well, who cares? Like, that was the Snyder era, and, like, we're kind of doing this now. Technically, it's the same character, the same actor, but you get what we're doing. So you're kind of expected to drop all kind of consistency in a degree up until the BVS Lex Luthor file scene on Diana Prince. Overall though, guys, I really don't want this to seem like, oh, a nitpicky kind of review. I still thoroughly enjoyed the movie. I think the first movie, if I'm being fully transparent here, was a bit grounded and tonally different in the way that I appreciated it, but it still had some of the funny, quirky, goofy themes, even in the first movie, that this movie just really kind of turned the saturation up on 100%, which isn't a bad thing either. It also fit in very well with the 80s. I really enjoyed the empowerment that this movie kind of gave in many different angles and avenues in terms of meanings. The list really just goes on there. I definitely will be buying this on like 4K. It's not kind of like a movie where I came out of Justice League being like, I'm never going to buy that. This will be something that I'll be happy to watch again. But yeah, overall, Wonder Woman 1984, whilst this kind of imperfect film, which is very hard to strive for perfection, it's almost inconsequential. It still does a lot. Patty Jenkins really does, despite completely changing the flavor up, succeeds in all the right areas. The things that I think raise issue aren't necessarily, as I said earlier, to the hardcore detriment of the movie. Yeah, I do think it lets it down in some ways more than others. I think the way I can conclude that there is more through they could have done a lot better, I feel, if that was a bit more thought out in some areas. I don't know. But either way, Wonder Woman 1984 is something I definitely give 2 thumbs up for in terms of recommending to you to go and see, which you probably have if you're watching this review. I'm very grateful to Warner Bros. For letting me go see this. Hopefully I can do this a lot more with future DC movies just like this, so I can kind of give you all a heads up with what is what from my perspective. I would love to know your spoiler thoughts down in the comments below, because this is the video for that. So other than that, everyone, I hope you had a lovely Christmas. If you did and you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate a like on it, and maybe you want to subscribe, especially if you're actually not subscribed, because I do videos like this quite a lot. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see all of you Amazons in the next video. Goodbye.